Oh, good enough is kind of an interesting term. I kind of begged my way onto the team.
Changing from being like a player to like the coaching role, what was kind of like the shift like?
Number one, consistency, and the second thing is discipline.
What were kind of the pillars that you wanted to build?
Rising tide lifts all boats, right? First, you have to be consistent. You got to run a lot.
It's an individual sport, but at the same time, it's very team focused. Welcome to Behind the Huddle and the very first video episode. Today's guest is boys cross country head coach, Coach Nielsen. He has been leading this team from the very inception of Northwest, has continued to brought them to state year over year. He leads some of the best anaerobic athletes here at the school. I ran my sophomore year, and it was truly great to being able to catch up with him and truly hear his perspective, for he's not one of those coaches who's going to be super loud and about. And without further ado, here is Coach Nielsen. Welcome to Behind the Huddle. I'm your host, Boston Mendenhall, and today we have the privilege of talking to Coach Nielsen, the boys cross country head coach. Over the years, he has continued to build teams that produce results. In the first season, qualifying for state and claiming 25th in state year over year. He hasn't gone backwards, and his best finish has been 5th in state. He's one of the fastest men too, and probably one of the only coaches who would still be able to compete at the level with all of his high school athletes. He used to race at UNI before taking up coaching here. Welcome to the show, Coach Nielsen.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So before you got started here at Northwest, you kind of ran cross country, obviously, because you're kind of weak and fast. Yeah. But what drew you to the sport and cross country in general?
Yeah. So when I was in middle school, my first year I could play football. My dad said I wasn't allowed to play football with all my friends. Yeah. So I was kind of looking around for what other options there were. I have an older brother. He ran cross country and track, and he had a lot of success when he was younger. And so that kind of set the bar for me. Yeah. Always wanted to kind of compete with my older brother. Mm-hmm. So that kind of got me started. We had a kind of a legendary coach at our high school that had been there a long time. And he kind of, that first year, kind of took me under his wing a little bit and kind of helped me fall in love with the sport. So, and then as I grew in Cedar Falls, the running community there is fantastic. There's fantastic trails and a fantastic running community. So that helped me kind of develop my love for running. Mm-hmm.
And then you eventually were good enough to go to UNI. How was that kind of journey, you going to college?
Yeah, good enough is kind of an interesting term. I kind of begged my way onto the team at UNI. So I probably shouldn't have gone to UNI, but I kind of for some reason they let me walk on, and I had to work really hard, and that's where I learned how to be a humble athlete, and really the dedication and the love that it takes to run at the Division I level was something that I learned, and I kind of came through that and ended up having some success later on in my college career. And those are some of the things that I carry with me now as a coach, some of those life lessons I learned in college.
So now that you kind of are out of college and everything like that, and you started like either looking for a job and everything with coaching and everything like that, like what initially coming out of college made you want to coach? Whether that, like, did you want to just continue on with like the sport after? I mean, you're already training, you're still in great shape and everything like that, but you want to like have the same impact that your coach at your previous high school had? Yeah,
I think, I had a lot of really positive impacts on me, especially when I was in high school. Obviously, when you run a sport a long time, you have some people that probably don't have as great of an impact on you, and you desire more for yourself. And so having some positive and some negative interactions with some coaches really kind of made me want to give a positive experience to other athletes, and maybe an athlete that was told no by their dad, like I was, to playing football or another contact sport like that, give them an avenue to compete. And so that's one thing that I really was looking to do out of college was show how running can be fun. That competitive, intrinsic drive can be really important and develop in other areas of your life as well.
So out of college, what was kind of your first coaching job? Was it like recreational, or was it here at Waukee?
Yeah, so my first job teaching was in Waukee, and I didn't start coaching cross country that first fall when I got my job, but that spring there was a volunteer coaching position that came up with the boys track team.
Yeah.
And that was at a time where I think the boys track team was 2-time defending state champs and at Waukee. And I knew I wanted to be a part of the program. I knew I wanted to coach. And so I took that volunteer coaching opportunity. And then that kind of led into a cross-country position opening up, and then eventually a head cross-country position opened up for me. So, yeah, once I saw a volunteer opportunity at one of the best programs in the state, I kind of had to jump on it.
Yeah. When you were there at that Waukee team, what were kind of like the things that you learned initially from being a coach, from changing from being like a player to like the coaching role? What was kind of like the shift like?
Yeah, as an athlete, you're kind of focused on your event. So I was coming from college where I was running the steeplechase, the 5K, and the 10K on the track, very distance heavy. And then once you get into high school, well, first we don't even have the 5 and the 10K or the steeplechase, but still we have the distance events in the mile and 2 mile. But just the variety of athletes that you get out. Track and field really is a sport where you have kind of a melting pot of the whole athletic department. You have some athletes from all over different sports. Track and field might not be their A sport, but they have some other sports that they really excel in. And I think it's a really great. It's kind of a barometer for a team's athletic department, or a school's athletic department. So I think the biggest thing for me when I was coming into coaching was seeing just the mix of athletes and how that kind of gels together and works together to have success.
And so once you were able to get the opportunity to become a head coach, what were kind of the pillars that you wanted to build on, like making sure that when you get athletes who are maybe cross country isn't their A sport, to like still have them perform at a high level, or also like when you're the assistant track for distance, right? So how do you kind of also manage that? Like what did you want to build when you came here to Northwest?
Yeah, I think 2 things that I really like to focus on, and this comes up every year, is number 1, consistency, and the second thing is discipline. So a sport like cross country is a little bit different than other sports where, we on a daily basis, we're not hanging around campus a whole lot. And you really have to have an intrinsic drive to be good at a sport like cross country. And so first you have to be consistent. You got to run a lot. Okay. The people that are good are running a lot. And then the other thing is you have to be disciplined and have that intrinsic motivation to be good. So I would say those are kind of the 2 big pillars that I would kind of build on. And if you really look at consistency and discipline, I can't think of a whole lot of areas of life where you're going to be worse at something if you're consistent and you're disciplined in those. So those are really they transfer very well. Academics is a great area where if you're consistent in your study habits and you're disciplined, you're going to have a lot better grades as well. So I think it's a transferable skill to lots of other areas of life and going to help athletes in the future as well.
Yeah. So I heard this from a lot of cross-country boys, but you have a saying called rising tides raise all boats, kind of like the metaphor of certain people or team leaders can like bring everyone up. Can you like talk where you either got that from or kind of why you place it on your team?
Yeah, I can't remember exactly where it came from, but I think the emphasis was, this year we had 66 guys out for this sport. Whoa. And we're usually somewhere in the upper 60s, low 70s. And sometimes it's easy if you're someone that's maybe 30th to 60th on the depth chart to feel like you don't have an impact. But everyone counts in cross country where, you can see someone that might be a 24 or 23 minute guy and they can make an improvement in their 5K time. And that improvement should transfer throughout our team. Because we're all working out together. We're doing the same sorts of things, and we see one success over here should lead to success over here. So just kind of something that I try to emphasize a lot, that if someone else has success, you can have success too.
So I also think what's very interesting, at least about cross country, is it's very much similar to wrestling, where it's an individual sport, but at the same time it's very team focused.
It is.
So you have like your individual time, but then also you have a ranking of where you place and everything like that. So how do you help manage athletes, especially on like when it comes to like a varsity or a JV squad, to like help try to like get that team mentality of it's not just like how I perform, it's like how I perform to like help the whole team out and get the lowest possible score.
Right. That's something that we talk about all the time. I think when Bill Belichick was at the Patriots, there was one sign in the building, and that was "Do your job." Yeah. And that's something that we talk about on our team as well, where everyone has to do their job, because if you have one weak link in the chain, that's going to mess it up for everyone. All right. And so we really focus on everyone has to do their role and run the best that they can for the team. And I think that helps athletes when maybe you're in a tough section of a race. Usually it's the second half of the race that things really start hurting. Sometimes on a course we might have a tough hill in the second half of a race. And when you get to that point, you need to think outward and think about your teammates and doing it for something other than just yourself. And sometimes that's the drive that can get the most out of an individual. So really, at the end of the day, it becomes a win-win. It helps the individual and it helps the team.
Yeah. So just looking back at the current, obviously, if you don't want to, you don't have to name names, but like if there is a person who would say represents that's the most in the team, whether that's in the past or right now, who would you kind of say that would be?
Right. Yeah, I think we've had individuals every year that kind of that emulate that and that do your job. The people that come up right away are the kids that we would have that are battling some sort of nagging injury or some aches and pains, and they still get out and they run as well as they can on the day. Or we've had several times where we've had athletes come into a meet and they wake up that morning, they're not feeling the best. It's a lot of times it's allergy related, or it could just be a sickness going around. And the kids that are still able to kind of they probably don't PR in that race, but they still run to their potential to help their team. And we've had countless examples of that. I know this year at the Fort Dodge Invite, Zach Janilevich wasn't feeling his best going into that race. And he knew that, but he made the most of a situation. He still ran a really decent time, not as good as he wanted to, but he still put out a great performance. And we've had that in the years past as well. So those are kind of the performances and athletes I think of when it comes to doing your job. Can you put aside some of those nagging injuries or maybe a sickness that you're battling to kind of overcome that?
So kind of getting into like the season and everything. Have you played chess before at all?
I've tried. I've never figured it out. I'm more of a checkers guy. So.
So I always use this analogy when it comes to kind of a season. So in chess, you kind of have an opening, mid game, and end game. Yep. So it's kind of like different strategies to like get yourself in the best position, and then obviously the mid games to like improve as much on the board to like hopefully in the end win the championship or get the king or whatever.
Right.
So this analogy kind of be like especially with cross country, you're like summer running and then coming into like figuring out who your kind of people are, whether that's your team leaders and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Mid games kind of like obviously being in season and in the thick of it and making changes and going through energies, and then obviously the closing or the end game would be playoffs. And when it comes to like competing for the CIML and then seeing if you can, how you can play at state. So kind of going into the opening, when after a season's over and you're looking past all the seniors and like all the moments is gone and everything like that. What are you looking at for your athletes when it comes to like the next summer? Obviously a lot of them will compete in track. But like after that season's over and everything, like what do you kind of look for or want your people to do in order to get themselves in the best position to compete when it comes to fall, whether that's in the summer?
The first thing that comes to mind is the consistency piece. So we had our state meet on Friday, and I've basically spent as much free time as I had this weekend, taking a look at basically the top 25 teams in the state, what they bring back versus what we bring back, and how we're going to kind of fit into what the next fall is going to look like. And so now, and then I can kind of identify maybe some weak spots that we have, and maybe some athletes that this past summer didn't have a great summer or they weren't very consistent, but someone that might be able to be more consistent this summer, and they can make a big jump because they just haven't put in as much work. And if they get consistent over the next 52 weeks, we're going to have a good shot. So those are some of the things I'm looking at, where maybe some athletes that had a decent season.
Yeah.
But maybe they didn't have, like, the summer leading in wasn't as good as it could have been.
Yeah.
And how are we going to move them to have a more consistent winter, spring, like you said, in track, but then again, in the summertime next summer, so that, you know, we get to I think it's August 11th next year is when we start practice. We get to August 11th next year. We're going to have a brand new team.
Yeah.
And everyone, again, rising tide lifts all boats, right? So everyone's going to be better come August 11th.
Yeah. So let's just take for an example, let's say there's an athlete you're looking at to try to fill a varsity spot.
Yeah.
And haven't been kind of consistent. What are either those conversations or like what measures do you take to try to like help just like push that person in the right direction, right? To try to get them to a spot where you know that they can compete and will be a valuable part of the team.
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes it's showing the data and showing sometimes kids don't realize exactly where they're at.
Yeah.
And so seeing the data and seeing the opportunity that they have in front of them is a big piece of it. I think the other thing is trying to figure out what the goals are of each athlete.
Yeah.
Every athlete has a little bit of a different motivation for why you want to run. You kind of got to be a little interesting in Iowa when it's going to be dark at 4:30 here for the next couple months. It's going to be windy and cold, but can we get out the door and can we get the miles in?
Yeah.
So trying to figure out what the motivation is for each athlete is a big part of it. And then sometimes it's simply showing them the data and saying, look, you can be here if we make the right choices over the next several months.
So when it comes to decisions, a lot of different coaches that I've talked to have a lot of different reactions. So a lot of them are very much, obviously cross country is a sport, there's not a lot of intangibles like basketball where it's like hustle or effort and stuff like that.
Right.
It's a lot more, your time and everything.
Yes.
But how do you kind of help out or in some sense use the data, or like how do you utilize, I guess my main question is like how do you utilize data to help either push an athlete or like help give them perspective? Yeah,
I mean, I think you got to look at kind of their race results. And I think the best indication of data is an average. So sometimes you get an athlete that has a really great performance, but again, going back to consistency, what's their average? Where are they hanging out most of the season? So that's a big piece of it is the average. And then I think the other side of it's the training. So if you have an athlete that has been kind of hovering around the same times all season, they've been pretty consistent, but maybe their training hasn't been as consistent. What's that going to look like if we jump that consistency up in the training? You would expect to see the results kind of follow suit. So I think it's kind of two parts, looking at the average of the results throughout the season, also looking at the training history.
When you look at like your training history, I'm guessing most of the time you're able to probably tell whether that's like in practice or whether someone like actually ran,
right?
Because of times like coming back from the summer. But like when you're in practice, I'm guessing you're probably not timing every single person individually. It would probably be impossible. So are you able to usually tell who kind of is pushing kind of the envelope, I guess you could say, in practice and everything like that, and who you can kind of expect better times from? Yeah,
and I think some of that goes back on the athlete's shoulders. The great thing is you can get a Timex watch for $35 off of Amazon or whatever. And I think the athletes that are intrinsically motivated are the ones that are going to be keeping that data on themselves. So that's a piece of it. Even if you spend more money, you can get a nice Garmin watch that's going to kind of have a log of all of that, and it can sync with your computer. And we have a online training platform that we use, or training log, so we can kind of look back and see. But yeah, obviously on some athletes, I am taking the times during practice and writing those down and making sure that we're kind of on the right track. So those are kind of some of the data points that I'm looking at, and as far as like the training goes.
Yeah. So now that you kind of, I guess, have gone after the summer and you're kind of getting into that preseason kind of time where you're not exactly at the race and everything like that. So I'm guessing you have a decent idea of who's coming back, and you probably have done some kind of time trial or something like that to see where everyone's at. But on varsity, usually there might be a couple of spots that are locked, but the spots that aren't locked, like how do you decide who gets put into varsity, whether that's the first time or other things like that? Is it specifically off time trials, or it's like something else? Like what do you kind of use to fill the spots?
Yeah, mostly it's the time trial. I think another piece of it is the consistency in practice. You know, if I'm going to, as a coaching staff, when we put 7 guys on the line or 10 guys on the line for a varsity race, we need to know what we're going to get out of those athletes. And we don't want to feel like we're at the casino just rolling the dice and hoping for the best, you know, with an athlete. So I think, yes, the data from the time trial is really important, but also the consistency piece is a big part of it as well.
Yeah.
So we know what we're going to expect out of the athlete.
When it comes to relying on times to make a decision, especially kind of towards the beginning of the season, what are you looking at? So obviously a lot of people will have, for example, like you talked about Zach, obviously he didn't feel the best, but he still like put out a time that was very much noteworthy and did quite good.
Yes.
But how do you kind of make that decision based off like time versus like the effort you've seen in the practices and the in-betweens of the daily life and everything like that?
Right. And yeah, I think that's where kind of like the average comes back into play, where, you know, you can have an athlete that might not be feeling the best on the day, but if you look at their average throughout the season, or even their average on workouts, you know, maybe they have a bad workout, but consistently they're performing at a certain level. That's probably where you can expect them to perform on race day. So I think it's always kind of going back to the average.
And so I guess kind of once you have your team built,
I'm
guessing you probably do this before, so we might need to backtrack a little bit, but how does it come down when you choose team captains? So I'm guessing you probably want someone returning and everything like that, but what's kind of your process to choose the best people?
Yeah. So usually we have about 4 senior leaders that are kind of on our leadership team, and they're kind of in charge of different things. We do some team competitions throughout the year to build some connections within the team as well. But those leaders have to be a returning athlete, someone that knows our program well, but also someone that demonstrates kind of what our program stands for, someone that is consistent and someone that is disciplined, someone that we would want our freshmen coming in that, you know, have very little experience with cross country, being able to see the senior leader and be like, yeah, that's who I want to be, and that's who I'm working towards being over the next several years. So those are some of the things we're looking for. And then as well, we do take a vote from our other athletes on the team, and they give us some valuable insight as to who would be a good person to be a leader and maybe who's someone that isn't quite ready yet.
So when it comes to kind of your first practice, so now you kind of probably have your team leaders decided and you kind of like know kind of what you're having and everything. How do you set the tone on like for the whole team, especially for like a lot of these freshmen or the people who are running for the first time, or whether that's like getting rid of old habits or something like that, or something that happened last year that you don't want to repeat? Like how do you begin to start kind of setting tones for practice time?
And it can vary a little bit year to year, but usually first day of practice, one of the very first things we do is some sort of competition. So we break out our team into, usually it's about 4 or 6 groups, and we do some sort of physical competition where everyone in the team is involved, because I want to get back to the whole thing about we're here to compete, number one. We want to have fun as well, so it's a kind of a friendly competition that brings the fun in, but we want to be competitive, and then the other part of that as well is everyone counts, everyone matters, and we need to be connected as a team. Because connected teams are powerful teams. Those are going to be the teams that are going to be having success in October, or this year, November 1st was the state meet. Connected teams are powerful teams, and they're the ones that are going to have success down the long stretch in championship season. So those are the things we're looking for to kind of set the tone. We want to compete. Everyone matters, and there's no hiding in cross country. There's no bench. Everyone is running a 5K, and so your effort, your attitude, it all matters.
So kind of, I guess when you find the roster and who's everywhere, and you're kind of going into like the first race, when it comes to just putting it on the line, are you just like throwing it out there and just like seeing what works, kind of like we were saying earlier, like rolling the dice at the casino to see where everyone's at? Like, do you have general ideas of what happens in the first meet and everything, or anything like that?
Yeah, and in the past few years, we haven't always performed maybe as well at the first meet as we do later on in the year, and I think that's kind of by design. We're always trying to see what works best with each athlete, and maybe taking risks at different points. The whole goal throughout our cross-country season, and this starts with our first race, is we want to learn something about ourselves each race out, okay? There's a great guy from University of Michigan, Greg Harden, kind of a sports psychologist, and he always talks about you got to be the world's greatest expert on yourself. One subject, you can make excuses and look at everyone else, but you got to be the world's greatest expert on you. And I think that's so true in a sport like cross country, where you have to know what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are, so that the next time you go out to race, you can improve upon that and beat some guys that maybe you didn't beat that last time out. So that first race, we're trying some things. Historically, we haven't had our best race that first race, and I'm okay with that because I know we're going to reflect on that and learn something about ourselves for the next time out, and ultimately once we get to championship season.
Yeah. When it comes to your eventual in-season adjustments, what factors do you consider before you look to make a switch between someone? Yeah,
it kind of comes down to what we're seeing in practice. Maybe the course can be part of that too. So the first race that we go to is up at Ames, pretty flat course.
Yeah.
We go to Marshalltown after that, another relatively flat course, a little hillier.
Yeah.
But then we go into a couple hillier courses down at Pella at Central College, tough course. And then this year we went down to Rimrock Classic, that's at Kansas University.
Yeah.
Super hilly course. And so,
like Southeast Polk hilly, or
worse. Okay, yes.
Oh, I mean,
you go back into some woods, and we were doing our pre-meet on the course the day before, and we're running the course, and we get to the first downhill, and I think some of our guys didn't think we were on the cross country course anymore. It was that hilly. They didn't know what was going on, and I was like, no, this is what a real cross country course looks like.
That's crazy.
We hit a couple. The course is going to depend on what we're trying to do as well.
Yeah.
That specific course down at Kansas University, I think you climb about 200 feet within the first 2 miles of the race, which is a pretty good climb for most 5K courses. Most courses that we run are going to be about 200. We're going to climb about 200 for, like Southeast Polk. You climb about 200 feet throughout that course. You climb that in the first 2 miles. And then you hit the last mile where you're climbing over 100 feet in just the last mile. So it's a tough course. We learned a lot going back to being the world's greatest expert on yourself.
Yeah.
We learned a lot about ourselves at that meet.
Can't imagine.
Yeah.
Southeast Polk's bad enough for me. That's one of the reasons why I was done with cross country. I was like, oh my gosh, can't take it.
That's a course. And so, and we go down to Kansas. That's a really tough course. A couple of weeks later, we have our conference meet at Southeast Polk. And now all of a sudden, that's not as big of a deal because we've experienced that Rimrock Classic course. So it's fun to have the variety of courses, but we try to go to the same. We like to go to the same courses and have very little variety year to year, so that we kind of know what to expect and we know the courses and what strategies may or may not work from year to year.
Yeah. So when it comes to just being in season, I ran cross country my freshman or sophomore year.
Yep.
So it was definitely different than a lot of seasons that I've had, where it was a different kind of mental challenge.
Yeah.
Going from practice to practice, like knowing, hey, I gotta do repeat Ks today, and it's gonna suck, right? It's completely different compared to a different kind of, obviously, different sports have different hardships, but when you kind of go in between, like these really, really hard week or really hard week of practice, how do you keep your players motivated and also create a practice plan to like keep them motivated and still healthy and not hurt any injuries?
Right. Well, yeah, and I think unfortunately injuries are a part of our sport. That's just kind of the nature of the beast. But I think one thing that we try to do is we try to have some consistent workouts throughout the fall that we can kind of come back to. So kids are familiar with the workouts; they kind of know what to expect.
Yeah.
We always have the training plan on a Google sheet so kids can check it on their phone, on their laptop, 24 hours a day, whenever.
Yeah.
So they kind of know what to expect coming to practice. I think that helps the mental side of it a little bit. But I think the other thing of it is every week we do some sort of team challenge where we have senior leaders that are in a team. We do a team challenge. Usually it's on a Friday where we do some sort of team competition. Getting back to competition, also coming in with a little bit of discipline and consistency as well to hopefully have to have those things to be successful in the team challenge.
Of course, yeah.
But also to have and try to make it fun too. And so I think that kind of helps break up the monotony of training. Because again, if you're going to be good at cross country, you're going to run a lot, and it can be monotonous to just put in the miles after miles, or like you said, the K repeats every other week. So trying to have a little bit of variety in some other areas to kind of keep things light and fun.
Yeah. When it comes, I've actually a lot of coaches this. I mean, I'm probably going to say that a lot because anyways, but how do you keep your athletes motivated but at the same time accountable?
Yeah.
Because I know it's very much kind of there's very much like, I guess you could say like a teeter-totter of how much you want to do it before like maybe they slip off the edge and they're not running how good they are, or like you push them too far and now they don't want to do it anymore.
Right.
So how do you kind of balance that?
Yeah, I agree. I think the teeter-totter is a good analogy. You want to have it light and fun and everyone motivated.
Yeah.
But the reality is that's not always going to be the case, and sometimes you have to come down with a little bit of accountability or some discipline for the athletes. And I think the other part of it that makes it different is each athlete is going to be slightly different. And so I think that's the challenge as a coach is you kind of really got to know your athletes on a deep level, more so than just what time they are running in the place. But you got to get to kind of know their family, maybe some other hobbies that they have outside of school, other than running, to know what kind of makes them tick. And that's always the challenge every year, is to figure out what motivates each athlete and then try to tap into that when it matters most, kind of at the end of the season.
Yeah, and that actually went perfectly into the next question of everyone's different, obviously, but how have you found the best when approaching trying to meet the needs of an individual athlete, but also still maintaining like a good training plan and the same discipline that you looked upon across the whole team? Right.
I think that's something that, I'm trying to improve on every year is, getting to know your athletes. You have some athletes that are similar each year. Yeah. And you can kind of be like, oh, this worked for that athlete, so this is probably going to work for this new athlete as well because they're similar. But even still, there's that variance that things can change, and it's not always, just kind of a plug and play. So, I think you have to do a lot of different things to try to motivate athletes. And what was the question? I'm trying to remember.
Kind of how do you tailor to the needs of an individual athlete? Yeah,
I think that's just kind of individual conversations. I think maybe an advantage that we have for cross country that's different than other sports is, about 3 days a week for the most part, we're out on a run where the whole point is to be able to have a conversation during the run. Yeah. And I'm running with the guys, and I can kind of get around to different guys, have individual conversation with them, and that helps me learn a little bit more about them. Yeah. My assistant coaches are usually either running or on a bike as well with their groups, and kind of checking in with athletes. And so it is a very social sport. Yeah. And I think we can use that as an advantage as coaches to get to know our athletes a little bit better.
I found this a lot. A lot of people talk about it. I even asked Coach Westy about it as well. Yeah. A lot of saying about how cross country is very much a social sport, and like there's a social aspect of why a lot of people come back, and the community has. Can you just talk a bit about that? Yeah.
I think kind of like I just mentioned, where most weeks about 50% of our work or more is just we're out running at a conversational pace, and that's the whole goal, is to be able to talk to a teammate, a coach as you're running. And so I think it's really important to build those connections, and that's something else that we, throughout the season, but that's also why we kind of start that way, is we have to be really connected and respect each other and value each other and what they bring to the team. Because we're going to be spending a lot of time together. And, even when we go on some trips or, a lot of our meets are about an hour bus ride away for the most part. Or if we're going down to Kansas, we're spending a few more hours in the car, and you got a lot of time to get to know each other. So, definitely a very social sport. And, I think that's something that each year we're trying to be intentional about, building those connections and giving opportunities for kids to get to know each other.
I don't know if you guys still do this, but do you guys still do like Flag Fridays? Everything
yes.
like that?
Flag Short Friday.
How did that come around?
Flag Short Friday, that's kind of a carryover from when I was head coach at Waukee. And so that's a fun one too. We had a group of senior boys. I want to say it was the COVID year, so it had been the fall of 2020.
Is that like David Parks and?
That would have been his junior year. So this would have been Corbin Truitt, Nathan Holstrom, the Christensen twins, Vincent
Love the Christensen twins.
Yep.
They're awesome.
Vincent Hodges was in that group.
Oh, he's so fast. He scored like a 32 on his ACT or something.
Yeah.
Or 36.
Yeah, he got a perfect score that year too. So, but anyways, those guys, I can't remember who it was. It was probably Nathan Holstrom. I think he was an interesting guy. He was a fun guy. He really lightened the mood for everyone. Him and Corbin Truitt both. But anyways, I think it was one of those guys ended up getting some flag shorts from BOA. BOA is just a running company that makes running apparel. Yeah. And they got some flag shorts, and then they convinced some other guys on the team to get them, and it kind of just spread and became a thing where every Friday we're gonna wear Flag Short Friday. So I think that year it really kind of caught fire on the team a little bit, and everyone was doing it, and we've carried it over a little bit. It's probably not quite as popular as it was, but that's another one of those things that, cross country is a unique sport. We're out there running in short shorts a lot of the time, so we might as well look a little goofy while we're doing it. So it's fun.
Do you own any short shorts that are flag, and if so, what's your favorite one?
Oh yeah, I do have one pair. I had to jump on the bandwagon and get a pair myself, and I have Norway's. Norway? Yes.
Are you Norwegian ancestry at all?
Yes, a little bit. Yeah. So I have all sorts of different ancestry, but Norway, I picked them. I thought the flag looked cool. They at the time I bought them, they had the best distance runner in the world. Yeah. Okay. Ingebrigtsen. So I thought that was cool. But I might have to buy another pair for next year. So we'll see.
Maybe you get like some Northwest ones or something like that.
That little NW or something. Yeah, that'd be cool. So
so kind of going into the end game, how do you help prepare your athletes for big meets? This is probably a bit more like freshmen, because I'm guessing seniors will have most of it figured out. But like, how do you approach helping them cope and handle with the pressure?
Yeah, I think we use an analogy about a boat sometimes. So you don't focus on the water that's outside of the boat, you focus on everything that's inside the boat. Yeah. And it really comes down to what can you control and what's within your control, what's not within your control. Yeah. And so we use that analogy. We do talk about things that aren't within our control, because like you mentioned, the Southeast Polk cross country course, hilly. We had our conference meet there this year, and so before the meet we addressed, it's going to be hilly, and yes, it's going to be challenging, but we had a huge number of athletes that ran course best on that ran seasons best, because I think once you kind of acknowledge the things that you can control and you accept those things, they're not going to change. Then you can go focus on the things that you do have control over, which is your effort, how you're going to execute the race, the things that you're going to be thinking and talking to yourself about throughout the race. And those are the things that are ultimately going to lead to a great performance. So I think it's acknowledging the things that we can't control, accepting those so that we can move on and start focusing on the things that we can. Yeah.
I know a lot of runners have problems with this or just struggle with this, but how do you help athletes with like their own like self-talk when they're running? Right. Because it's very much like the course, and just 3.1 miles, like 5K. You're just going, like you're just basically deer in headlights. Yep. You gotta be like, hey, I gotta hit this hill, or I gotta pick up the pace at this certain spot, or anything like that. Yep. How do you help them with the self-talk? Because a lot of the time there's not someone to just, give them a little push or give them the motivation.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that makes cross country unique and challenging and at times frustrating as a coach, where it's not football or other sports where you can call a timeout and be like, hey, remember, this is what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
At cross country meet, I'm yelling at my athletes as they come by, but I would say about 25% of them even hear me. I'll be like, hey, you did exactly what I told you to do at that hill in the race, and they're like, coach, I didn't even hear you. And so, sometimes I'm just yelling to make myself feel better at a cross country meet. They're probably not even hearing what I'm saying. So I guess what I'm saying is all the coaching I have to do is throughout the week leading up to the meet. Mm-hmm. And the athlete has to be 100% autonomous to go out and execute the race plan that they've been prepared to do.
Yeah, of course.
And so that can be a challenge as a coach, but you kind of got to walk through and talk about the race, and again, going back to accepting the things that we can't change. Mm-hmm. Knowing that the course is going to be hilly, or knowing your strengths and weaknesses as an athlete, and knowing yourself so that you can get through different points of the course, and ultimately it's try to have some success. So I think it's trying to accept the things that we can't change, and then having a plan for when the race is going to get tough. Because I don't care if you're the state champion or if you're trying to break 25 minutes for a 5K. It's going to be tough for you at some point. When you're trying to do something your body's never done before, it's going to be difficult. Mm-hmm. And so just having your athletes prepared for that, and talking through what that's going to feel like and how we can overcome that and what we can tell ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Obviously you spent a lot of time coaching. You've been a very, obviously, amazing coach.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, come on. You've qualified every single time you've been a coach here. How has it kind of evolved over the years? Has there been anything that's stuck out that a big change has happened because of something that happened, or just what big changes have happened?
Yeah, I think in our sport and kind of the way that we've progressed, it's kind of incremental changes. I don't think there's anything that's a big shift happens. It's and this is the process I've started going through since Friday at our state meet, and I'll continue over the next month or two, is really evaluating our season, getting the athletes' input, talking with my assistant coaches. What are some things that we're doing well? What are some things that we need to improve on? Mm-hmm. What are some things that we're doing that are okay, but they're not really getting the ROI that we need, and things that we need to kind of push to the curb. Mm-hmm. And so another part of it is reaching out to some other coaches throughout the country too that are having a lot of success, and what they're doing that we might not be doing, to give our athletes the best chance of having success. So there's lots of things. I think there's small changes that you make. And if you really look at the good programs, like right now, one of the best teams in the state is from Utah, American Fork. Mm-hmm. And their coach, I was listening to him talk. I think he didn't win a state championship until his 10th or 15th year. And then and then it was over the next 10 years, he won 7. So it takes a long time, and that's why we go back to that consistency and discipline, mm-hmm. Where we know it's going to take time. We are in a long distance sport, right? This is an endurance thing.
Quite literally, yeah.
Yes, it would make sense that this is going to be an endurance process, and mm-hmm. it's going to take time to make some improvements over time. So even this year, I think last year we were 5th at the state meet. This year we were 7th. To some people's eyes, that might be we're taking a step back. Mm-hmm. And place-wise, it was a step back. But I think in a lot of other areas internally, and I think the athletes would tell you the same thing, we made a lot of improvements this year. It's that the competition was a whole lot better this year in the state. And so we're going to be ready for that next year. We're going to keep making those improvements within our team, and hopefully we'll be in a better spot in 365 days.
So obviously the season just ended, and you kind of talked a bit about that, but looking towards the future, and you kind of way at the beginning of the interview, you kind of said that you looked at the chart and everything, I guess, of who will be leaving and who's going to get replacements. What can we expect from the team in the future? And I guess that's really the question. So
I think we're going to be very competitive next year, and it's all predicated on the decisions that the athletes on the team are going to make. You know, who's going to put in the miles this winter, who's going to do the work during track season, and who's going to be consistent next summer as well. So I think if you look at our lineup, our top 7 from our state meet, we returned 5 of those athletes. I would expect, those are all 5 juniors, so those will be seniors next year. I think that's a really good recipe to have some success when you have a lot of seniors that have state meet experience. Again, it's going to be what are they going to do in the off season? Are they going to take advantage of the opportunity that's in front of them? We have several other juniors on our team this year that weren't in that state meet lineup that I think with a great winter, spring, and fall, they could contend to make a jump into that varsity lineup. Yeah. We also have a few sophomores that have made some good improvements. That again, consistent improvement, some dedication. They could make a jump. And also, we had our best freshman class that we've ever had.
Future's bright is what you're saying.
Future's bright, yeah. We ran 3 fresh soft meets this year. And all 3 times we ran the best fresh soft team, top 5 team average, second best and third best this year. So we've had some really great performances from our freshmen, and I expect to see some of those freshmen make a big jump next year. Yeah. And we might have some of those guys jump from being freshmen this year to being varsity athletes next year. So I think next year will be the most difficult year to make our varsity lineup. I think we're going to have lots of athletes vying for that spot, and it's going to be fun to see the choices the athletes make over the next several months, and if they're going to take advantage of their opportunity to try to get in that lineup come next fall.
Yeah. So kind of coming to a close, if there's anything you'd want to say to like an aspiring cross-country athlete, whether that's someone who's currently 8th grade who's going to be in the program the next time, or someone who's like just now starting in, what does it start, like 7th grade or 8th grade or something?
8th grade, yeah.
8th grade?
Yep.
What would you say to them?
Yeah, I think cross country is a fantastic sport for developing skills that are going to help you in all areas of life. Yeah. Going back to some of those principles that I talked about earlier that we kind of base our program on, consistency and discipline. You're not going to find any area of life where if you're more consistent or you're more disciplined, you're not going to have some success. So it's going to be a great sport to develop those skills. The other thing I would say is you never know how you're going to develop. Athletes that are consistent and disciplined usually start to see some improvement just naturally as they start to mature as well. Yeah. And so I see a lot of athletes that make a huge jump freshman, sophomore to junior year, and they're a completely different person by their senior year. So I think it's a fun sport to be involved in. I think we have a really great team culture where athletes are connected to each other. They genuinely care about each other and the success that they're having because they know that means success for them. Rising tide lifts all boats, right? Yeah. And I think it's a really great environment to have and develop some of those skills that you're going to develop skills for a lifetime. You're going to develop friendships for a lifetime, and it's gonna be a lot of fun doing that. So
I think that's a perfect note to end on. Yeah. Thanks so much for coming on the show, and it was great having a conversation with you and catching up.
Thanks for having me.
Of course.